Are you in there now?
Yeah, Matthew Kaplan has entered the, I think I can see myself. Okay, participants, like I have 2. So I should let them in. And how do I let them in?
This is so bizarre.
Um, see participants. And this is Matthew Kaplan.
You should be able to.
Oh, here.
Okay.
Here it is. Submit.
Oh, I think you say admit. No, right? It's admit or
Yeah,
something.
now there's.
Okay, let me see if I can do it here.
Okay, Kaplan is connecting to audio and can't hear you yet. Okay. Am I on audio? How do I know that I'm on audio? Okay, there's a mute button. But
Oh, you want the audio?
no, I just want to make sure that people can hear me. Matt is the only one that's.
Remember,
Yeah, that's. Okay.
audio's ready.
Well, that's the speaker. I guess my microphone is all right. In chat. Oh, you know what? I bet you I didn't send that
Oh, you
to.
can get in. I'm trying to figure out.
I bet you I didn't send that to to here. Go. Please.
Okay, you have admit all.
Okay, I sent him the.
Okay, you have 3 more people joining.
I should call, I think I have his phone number.
Chambers?
Um,
Most everybody
Pat,
is.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was just away for a second. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how you doing, Mike?
All right. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
All right. Okay, I'm trying to get this is my first Zoom meeting that I'm hosting, so
Richard.
yeah, Richard's on. He's connecting. He's okay.
Yeah, he's connected.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right.
You don't need a mask.
No, I know.
Are you hiding your beard?
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, so one person is waiting.
Okay. Hello.
Hi,
Hi,
Richard.
Richard.
I hear you.
Hi.
This is Paul and Barb Labus is on. Cynthia Ogoric is on.
Historian and neighbor,
Well, maybe not
artist.
a neighbor anymore.
Where
I
have
live-
you?
I moved to Danville, Illinois last year.
Ah, well, thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Well, we're among friends. We could do this at a coffee shop in East Chicago.
there you go. Just let me know and I'll brew a cup here.
I'm finishing one.
Okay.
Shall we begin? Hello.
Can't hear me.
Oh, you're muted. Michael, you're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Who did that? Who unmuted me? It's terrible. So I'm waiting for some. Okay.
Did I ever tell you, Michael, about the? Are you there, Michael?
Yes, I'm here, I think.
I haven't told you about the $1,000 stipend I received for one of these talks, did I?
Oh, well, I'll have to check with Indiana Humanities.
I gave it to Catholic Theological Union because they've been very good to me.
Yes, when I was on campus, I used to go over there for lunch. They always had a good lunch. And that, of course, that's back in the 70s.
It was an old hotel at that time. They later built a newer building across the street.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the newer building I went to. That would have been,
After 2000.
yeah, okay. So,
What happened to Jackie?
I don't know.
He's muted.
How do I unmute?
think she controls the
She
mute.
has to control that. So she just probably went on mute, right?
She should be able to hear us,
Okay,
but we can't hear if she's talking to us.
okay. Okay. Well, you know what? It's just, I've got about what, 4 after 5?
We can begin, and if others join us later, that's fine. If not, we'll keep going.
Okay, well, why don't I want to, now that we're on for, we have at least an hour, Richard, let me just, you know who's not on is Valerie Penninan.
Valerie is a faithful one.
Yes, and I don't see her. Anyway, let me just start this out. I just want to make a welcome to the 7th season of Calumet Revisited Forum. I'm Michael Bowes of the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative. Oh, Valerie's waiting. Second. So anyway, people are keeping or checking in. Valerie Penninan just checked in.
Hi.
And there's Valerie.
Hi,
And
Valerie.
Hi. Hi,
hi,
everyone.
all right. I was just starting to introduce everybody, and I introduced myself. And then, of course, you're the co-sponsor representing Calumet College. Valerie, and then I was wondering if there are any announcements to make from anyone that's on. If not, I have got several announcements. One is that Ollie is sponsoring a 20-mile bi-state Labor Day bike ride, and that's September 7th. The other announcement is that copies of Ollie's 20-year history are still available. And you can contact me or go to Ollie's website. My second book, Nate 1 of 13, will be available next week. It'll be out of the printers, and I'm excited about that. And my third book should be printed next month. So during the COVID, I've been busy. And then I just want to introduce Dr. Morrisroe, who will be speaking this evening about his role in the civil rights movement during the 1960s when he was a Chicago parish priest. Currently, he is a planner and attorney for the city of East Chicago. He received his doctorate degree from the Chicago Theological Union in Hyde Park and received a law degree from Northwestern University. Please note that all upcoming forums through May will be on Zoom meetings, and I'll be a little bit more professional by that time. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them through chat, and then we'll address these and other questions at the end of the presentation. So Dr. Morrisroe, you can take over.
Thank you, Michael. Can I be heard? I'm heard okay?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm doing this very different. I've spoken a number of times. I've committed it to writing since about 2012 when I was invited to visit Goldman Sachs by Anthony Brooks, who'd been an altar boy when I was in his parish on Chicago's South Side, St. Columbanus. And that's where I received the large stipend that I was able to donate to Catholic Theological Union. I then began writing around that time. I gave an address at Valpo University on the 50th anniversary in 2015, and modified that a few times, including this last January at Holy Cross College, which is kind of a spin-off of Notre Dame through one of the religious communities this last January. I decided I would do this a little bit different, and I'd like to dedicate it to two people. One is Father Al Spilly, who died recently. Father Al Spilly was a gifted writer and researcher. He grew up in the Robertsdale community. He did a great deal of research for Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, who was Archbishop of Chicago from the mid-80s until the mid-90s, at which time he died young of cancer. And the other man that Father Spilly did a lot of research for was Archbishop Garcia Siller, or Siller, who's the Archbishop of San Antonio. And even though Father Spilly had to retire to his order's old folks home, I guess you'd call it, in Ohio, he still continued to do research by email and other ways. So he also was a great gift to me. I followed him teaching a couple of courses in Old Testament and New Testament. I had wanted to teach those for a long time. I lusted after the opportunity, having spent a lot of time at Catholic Theological Union. And it was as Father Spilly went to San Antonio and left Calumet College that I had that opportunity. He gave me a lot of encouragement and some materials. The other person I'd like to dedicate this to, I don't know if this will be visible. It's from the Montgomery, Alabama newspaper. The courthouse is where the trial took place after the shooting. The jail was down the street from there. The sheriff, it was a deputy sheriff who shot and killed Jonathan Daniels and wounded me. And now that courthouse is dedicated to a wonderful man, John Williams, who was shot and killed by a 21-year-old in a kind of strange thing, and so they rededicated the courthouse to him. And I'm linking this talk with Calumet College and with Lowndes County, Alabama, which accidentally, it's where the unintended comes in, brought me to this, why I'm kind of identified with civil rights. I would like to dedicate this drawing from the book of Ben Sirach, which is part of, for those of you who have different background, it's one of the deuterocanonical books of the Bible, the books that are not in the Protestant Bible, but are in the Orthodox and Catholic Bibles. And usually it begins with, towards the end, chapter 44, let us now praise famous men. There's also a famous photography book of the Depression that uses that title. And so I will now praise the godly, our ancestors in their own time, the abounding glory of the Most High's portion, his own part, since the days of old. So what you're doing is kind of traveling with me through different parts of my life, and I'll focus on some of the people who kind of made that possible for me. Grew up on Chicago's Northwest Side, worked for a number of summers in a cemetery that Paul would appreciate with all the trees and sunshine. But then in the summer of 1960, there was a drought and they didn't need me to cut grass and sprinkle graves so much. So My dad, who was kind of an enterprising guy, went back to a man he lived with in a boarding house on Chicago's north side, Ashland Avenue, and was able to get me a construction job the next day. How times have changed in terms of the ability to get a job. So Mr. Cawley took me to help build the Henry Horner low rent housing project that was torn down for the expansion and the building of the United Center in the mid 1990s. I met two men. One was the superintendent of that job, Phil Shevlin, an Irishman from Cicero, Illinois. And the other man was Eddie Cameron, an African-American from Lawndale. I worked with Cameron. There were two other blacks. I was the only white. The part of the reason that made so much importance to me was that someone's, okay. It made importance because I began to see the inequity of construction jobs. The fact that Eddie Cameron had to wait 8 years in a federal court to begin to do the job that he knew so well as a laborer, to crack the Iron Workers Union Local 1, and to become a not only an iron worker, but a foreman, and then himself a superintendent. The inequities in 1960, an example, there were this was the time of President Eisenhower had said there should be integration in the building trades for federal contracts. This was a HUD project, Housing and Urban Development. And the interesting thing was that there were 3 all-white construction carpenter crews on the project. It was 7 large buildings, 7 and 14-story buildings along Lake Street, and there was 1 all-black crew, and there was 1 black apprentice plumber who had to literally almost eat shit during the time he worked to get an opportunity to become a licensed plumber. That summer made such an impression on me that I started to become interested in the African-American community, to a certain extent in the civil rights movement, but it was just more the African-American community. My own parents were immigrants from Ireland. I knew that many on the South Side were part of what is called the Great Migration, people who from the beginning of the 20th century until the 1970s used to come with the great promise that Chicago had as far as job opportunities, and to be free from some of the ways of the South, the ways that I would later discover in Lowndes County. A year or 2 later, I worked as a deacon, as an intern in Lawndale with the Father Dan Millett. Father Millett was a tremendous man, known most of all for a picture that appeared in Time magazine in July of 1963. Father Millett and 7 Milwaukee sisters demonstrating in front of Loyola University in Chicago. And part of its fame was at that time, it was very rare that someone would take on a Catholic institution as that was done, because the Loyola University had a swimming pool at its Lewis Towers campus. Lewis Towers closed that swimming pool rather than let Marie Leaner, who was later a parishioner at the church I worked at, swim during that summer of '63. And as a result, Father Millett had his moment of fame. He later had it many other ways, and Father Millett was someone whom I continued to visit until he died about 3 years ago. later in the seminary, Cardinal Meyer, also a biblical scholar who was a mentor, asked what I would like to do. We had interviews before we were ordained, and I told him I'd like to work in the Negro community, as it was said in that time. I was assigned to St. Columbanus, a more middle-class African-American community near 71st and King Drive. The church was wonderful. On my way to getting assigned there, I stopped at the University of Chicago with the young man who was driving me there, met one of the Veneco brothers, Jim Veneco, who was getting his doctorate in sociology, and told him where I was going and what we were doing. He said, "You got to look up Dave and Mary James." Again, talking about people who showed me different parts of the world. Dave James, for instance, gave a few Saturdays as a mentor, taking me around the neighborhood, introducing me to the local community newspaper and its editor, who later became a congressman from that area. So I spent Saturdays with Dave. One of the joys later in life was that I received a doctorate at Calumet College in 2009, and that Dave was able to take the South Shore out to Hammond, and I was able to meet him and make him part of that. Dave, with his 7 kids, an example of when opportunities are presented. His oldest kid has taught math at Howard University for the last 30 years. His second is a lawyer, retiring recently from the state's attorney in the Attorney General, rather, in Chicago. The third has taught physics, nuclear physics at Reed University out in Portland, Oregon, and so on with the other kids. They're all wonderful, including Kathy, the baby, the first child to go from K through 12 in Winnetka's New Trier Township High School. And the other kids went part-time, part of their education, but Kathy went from kindergarten through 12th grade. Persons like the Jameses were part of what got me into meeting others. Father Clements, Father George Clements, for instance, a noted African-American priest, the first priest actually to go throughout the Chicago seminary, to go from the high school, prep school stage all the way through to ordination. He was working at a parish down the street from mine. He had led a group of people for the famous March on Washington in August of 63, which the anniversary of which we celebrated this last Friday. Father Clements later mentioned to me that of all the priests that he had worked with in many years, that I was the only one who had ever asked him how to work in the African-American community. That I told him that this isn't my community. What do I need to know? How can I better understand the people that I'm working with? Father Clements took me later to the Lake Meadows Council of Catholic Men. This council began because of the Knights of Columbus' refusal to admit African Americans during the early 1960s. He had me speak because I had been to a national liturgical conference in St. Louis, and he thought that I could share with him, as he was talking about the civil rights movement, and had David Lorenz, a young African-American writer about my age, who wrote for Black World and Ebony. David, who took me around Lawndale. David, who introduced me to Lerone Bennett, author of Before the Mayflower, a book that had about 3 or 4 different editions, and gave a great deal of insight into the African American community and history. I think as I became part of the community, my parents, I remember telling me, why couldn't I simply stay close to the mainline church people? Why was I getting involved with people who were interested in the civil rights movement, people who had been to Mississippi, Alabama, who had worked, and they thought that if I had simply stayed with the ushers who were so gracious to them when they had come to visit that church, that I would not have gotten the kinds of predicaments that I later did. One of my neighbors, in fact, across the street, was A.A. Sammy Rayner, funeral director. His funeral home had buried the young man who began the civil rights movement when he died down in Mississippi because he was alleged to have flirted with a store owner, Emmett Till. Mr. Rayner introduced me to the Catholic Interracial Council, took me to a dinner at which Dr. King was awarded. Little did I know that a year later that I would be the honoree of that same Catholic Interracial Council John F. Kennedy Award. So I went to Alabama with Mr. Rayner. I had been in Alabama in March of 1965 for the Selma to Montgomery March. The Catholic Interracial Council had a busload of lay people and priests, husbands and wives, as well as a couple of young priests like myself. He managed to talk my pastor, Father McCahey, into allowing me to go. And that was a wonderful trip. I decided I would go back on my vacation. And in August of '65, went with Mr. Rayner, his two sons, and some Chicago State University students, was at the college at that time, and went to Alabama to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference meeting. While at that meeting, among those present were Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis. I knew Mr. Lewis, John Lewis. He had spoken at our church during that spring of '65. He introduced me to Carmichael. Carmichael suggested that I meet John Daniels, who was an Episcopal seminarian who came for the final day of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, along with Ruby Sales. I'm going to ask you if I can stop a moment and get a bottle of water upstairs. I ask your apologies in doing this. May I just do it for a moment?
Sure.
Michael?
Sure, go
Be
ahead.
right back.
Valerie,
Mhm.
are you at work or are you at home?
I'm at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
I don't have Zoom equipment in my office yet.
Oh, I was going to ask you to go for that bottle of wine. That's got to be around somewhere. But since you're at home, I guess I'll have to go without. You know, Amy's on this, so I better.
I just wanted to say, because I'm on my cell phone, so just so you know, and I have it on mute because I'm also doing it from home. So just wanted to let you know I've joined. Very interesting.
Okay, Amy. I just didn't want to get Valerie in trouble.
I might be having wine right now too, you know, so you'll never know.
Michael, I noticed that time is going. I'm going to have to move on. I
Okay.
apologize. I thought it good to tell you some of the way in which an Irish American kid from an all-white neighborhood grew up to see life differently and to have spent much of the rest of my life in Black and Hispanic communities. I wanted to talk one thing. Gwendolyn Brooks was a neighbor. You may be aware of the famous poet. There's a park and a sculpture dedicated to her on Chicago's South Side. One day I went, just knocked on her front door, asked her if she'd read some writings, which I had kind of created. I was keeping a log at that time. She was nice enough to go over some of them, to get them back to me, to suggest that I work with a writer, Harry Mark Petrakis, who she used to teach with at Columbia College. Went to Lowndes County, went back to Selma with Jonathan Daniels. He had me stay with a family that he was staying with. We went to Lowndes County the next day. We spent some time visiting, stayed overnight, and were part of a demonstration in a small community. Lowndes County is between Selma and Montgomery. During the famous March on Washington, 2 of the nights were spent, one at the west end, one at the east end of Lowndes County. So we did that. We were arrested. We were carried in what was usually used as a garbage truck, kind of a flatbed truck, and taken to the county jail in Hayneville. Hayneville is the county seat. We spent a week in jail. I got to know some wonderful people. Jimmy Rogers, who was an organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And during that, I came along with other things, put some writing together, some of which 15 years later, I sent to the people of St. Columbanus, the church where I had worked. Mentioned how, for instance, on the way to Hayneville jail, we were trailed by city police and other cars. We talked and sang freedom songs until we arrived at the Hayneville jail. Finally, the city garbage truck stopped behind the jail where everyone was asked to get off by a man named Lancaster, who also said, "There's an old lady here, she's 85 years old. I care more for her than any of you. I'm asking you one time to be quiet or suffer consequences. Now all of you under 16 stand beside the wall." And those under 16 were released to their parents. We got out of jail and we're waiting for a ride. We were let out of jail suddenly. Carmichael and George Wiley had been bailed out on Wednesday because Carmichael's life, frankly, was in danger in that situation. However, Jonathan and I chose to stay with the people we were with, about 20 of them, 4 of them young women who were on the first floor of the jail, ourselves in kind of unspeakable conditions in the upper part of the jail. We walked to a small cash store after we were out. Thomas Coleman, the man who executed Jonathan Daniels, was standing in the door with his 12-gauge shotgun, threatened to get the hell out of here before I blow your heads off. He shot Jonathan in the stomach, died instantly. Just mentioned briefly, in 1991, I was part of a group of people who went to the Episcopal Triennial Convocation. It's the policymaking event for the Episcopal Church, and gave testimony, had a booth, and tried to encourage the bishops and lay leaders of the Episcopal Church to make Jonathan a saint. I also have here, among other things, a book where Jonathan is added to the feasts, book of feasts and fasts, along with Martin Luther King, who was added to the same book around the same time. And just a brief point, O God of justice and compassion, you put down the proud and mighty from their place and lift up the poor and the afflicted. We give you thanks for your faithful witness, Jonathan Myrick Daniels, who in the midst of injustice and violence risked and gave his life for another. And we pray that we, following his example, may make no peace with oppression through Jesus Christ, the one who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit. I really have not even got to the halfway point. It's 35 minutes. You've been very patient in listening. Jonathan Daniels and I were carried to Montgomery, Alabama. He was underneath me, dead. These were the old kind of hearse ambulances. You may well remember them before we have all these neat EMT kinds of vehicles that are kind of floating hospitals or at least clinics. And I was sort of left for dead in the lobby of that hospital until a young Irish-born Catholic priest, Jim Cragen, came and met one of the doctors who he'd known from a baptism and asked that doctor to look in on me. And that Dr. Charles Cox, along with the Dr. Frank Miles, 6 doctors spent 11 hours on a hot August Friday afternoon ministering to me, taking out this buckshot. It was a 12-gauge shotgun. And I remember Miles telling me that after they had finished on my stomach, they decided to work on my back. That the question was, we weren't sure you were going to live, but we thought if you live, we want you to live well. And so they cleaned out some of the lead that was in my spine that has been part of my difficulty in walking through these years. It's why, Paul, I can't do as much as I can, as I'd like in walking through the DuPont natural area. What I'd like to do is, I have so much. I'd rather, though, do some Q&A with you for a few minutes. I told Michael I would like to finish at about 6. So let's do, if we can, if you have any questions for 15 or 20 minutes. I'm looking at myself, and I think my my thing moved on me. Okay. I apologize. This is a new format of doing this. I wanted really to point out how we really do things based on the gift of people we meet, people who inspire us, people who lead us. And that's what I am trying to do, and hopefully can put some of this into a little bit more reasonable piece. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Why don't we just,
Sorry, I didn't have my thing on when I went down water.
okay, we'll let you put it on.
Could you hear me? Could you hear me those last minutes?
Yes,
Okay.
we're okay.
Okay.
So why don't I just ask anyone to come up with a question?
If you don't have questions, we'll go on with some of the other items, but you may have some questions or observations that I'd like to give you an opportunity to express.
I have a question. Was it because of the Emmett Till incident that Alabama became as far as I know, the center of the civil rights movement?
Emmett Till died in Mississippi,
Okay.
uh,
And
next
what
to
was
it.
it about
But Emmett Till,
Montgomery?
however, was thought, Rosa Parks, for instance, in her, I think her autobiography mentioned that Emmett Till's death the summer before she refused to move off the bus was one of the kinds of events that had inspired her not, there was time to put a stop to what was going on. So Emmett died in summer of 55, and the Montgomery bus boycott began in, I think it was October or so. It ended in December when the Supreme Court came down with a decision uh, forbidding segregation on buses. So I think there's a lot. For instance, when I went down maybe 20 years later for a 2-day bus tour with a group of students that was sponsored by the Alabama Department of Education to visit civil rights sites. And we went from Alabama and Mississippi very interchangeably. We did visit Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was killed. We visited Fannie Lou Hamer's site. We visited Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the 3 young men were killed and found in a dump later. So I think the proximity, whether it be, well, in Montgomery, the bus boycott, Dr. King later moved to Georgia. Atlanta is in many ways the kind of more progressive center for the South. Birmingham seemed to resist any role in doing that. Have I answered, Cynthia?
Yeah, I think so. You're giving me more to think about too.
So if I could ask Richard, with us living in this time of real civil unrest, and so what are your reflections on this now and sort of the historic perspective that you have on it?
It's very different. The mix today of demonstration and destruction, and it seems at times it's some of the demonstrators are into destruction, but for the most part it's almost like 2 separate groups that come together. We mentioned this as President Trump is feeding the police up in Kenosha this afternoon. I don't fully understand why. It's nice to destroy things perhaps and say, these stores are part of the oppression, but when you see the organized kind of destruction of downtown Chicago a couple of weeks ago with vans letting out groups of people to raid some of the stores, and the stores had been pretty well reconnoitered before to see where the action would take place. I must admit I'm a little bit miffed by some of this as to where it's going, what the price. I see it possibly leading to the reelection of President Trump, which should be a disaster. But it certainly gives him a lot of ways to manipulate the public and appeal to the public. I think the Black Lives Matter and the demonstration and some of the organization, I think the action of athletes, basketball players, football players, baseball players, I think is very significant. I think it was a baseball player in tears about what some of this meant and why it was so important to speak out and to stop the world, in a sense, to say, this is wrong. I'm just not quite sure what the manipulators are going to do with all of this. It's certainly not as clear cut as what was occurring in 1965. My wife was a high school counselor for 20 years, and we talk often about the difficulty of making kids aware of opportunities, of her, like, beating them over the head at times, whether it be to college or to a trade or to some kind of sense of moving them out of the stupor of not taking seriously opportunities were before them. I know she and some other councils at East Chicago Central worked very hard at that. As you with your daughter and I with my kids, how important it became at a high school age to try to give our kids another opportunity to grow, to go to somewhere like St. Ignatius in Chicago. And Valerie is moving. Am I answering, at least moving in the direction of trying to cope with what is a very difficult situation?
It is. I'm just as a little bit of a follow-up. It feels like with technology the way it is now, people are confronted more directly with the violence that's been perpetrated on the Black community, especially by police. And it seems that it's getting into the American consciousness in a different way. And I'm wondering if you think that that technology has a way to make this more real to people. I mean, I think of you, and if that had happened today, you may have been a viral video, and
That's one of the interesting things about it was, since it happened in Alabama, it was very well, hardly at all known in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
I think of a police lieutenant who I met recently. The city had done a small interview, something that was somewhere that appeared on the city website about what I had done and what had happened. And George Cassi, who is African American, very active in the community, works a lot with the Salvation Army and other activities, trying to help people, saying, he said, why didn't you ever tell me this? Why didn't I know this? And very genuine about it. That's the difference between 1965 and 2020. Things are known all over the country. How I used to think of Portland, Oregon as being a fairly I don't think I thought of Portland as one of the areas that would have the whatever it is that it's expressed over the last month, but it came from someone in Minneapolis, and how that shooting in Minneapolis, and again, the fact that was caught on video and that it was shown. There was no video of Tom Coleman or of Jonathan Daniels' death, or of, my lying on the ground before going off to the hospital. I know I had this Father Millett who I knew well. He said, "Why didn't you die? You'd have been somebody." And he just, his view of what had happened and how things are. He, on the other hand, he was a very supportive, good friend, but he was looking at it, and he had a very sharp sense of of how you become somebody. Valerie, do you have any questions?
I'll just say someone else had a question that I saw pop up in the chat. Was the man who shot you ever brought to justice?
He was indicted for manslaughter, and the trial took place about 40 days after the shooting. The Attorney General Richmond Flowers of Alabama tried very much to get the court to wait until I'd be available as a witness. The county prosecutor, who seemed to be very wired into Coleman's family, said, "What's the difference? You know, this wannabe priest from Chicago wouldn't add much of anything." So they just went ahead. It took about 90 minutes, which I assume part of which was spent having a cup of coffee for 12 of his white male relatives and friends to decide that he was not guilty for the death of Daniels. I later went back to Alabama about a year later with a priest attorney who had been with me during the time I was in the hospital. And he, the one question the jury, I was there because the jury was considering, the grand jury, whether or not to upgrade my charge, which was some minor thing, to a felony. It was only a misdemeanor, he's shooting me in the back. And the one question the grand jurors asked that I will never forget was, "What were you doing down here messing with our black niggers?" You know, this was the worldview of the kind of people who found Coleman innocent. Coleman lived to be about 87. He lived into the mid-90s. And one of the ironies is that the first black sheriff found Coleman very helpful. He would come around the sheriff's office and provide leads and tips and support. And so the core of his anger seems to have been at these two white outsiders, clergy wannabes who had no respect for the way of life in Lowndes County. So Gloria Larry House, who was a Army brat who was with us when we first went to Lowndes County from Selma, felt very much that his, even though it was said that he was shooting for Ruby Sales and that John pushed Ruby Sales out of the way, but her view was that it was really the two white clergy that he wanted to let any other clergy who'd have this in mind to let them know they were not going to be welcome in Lowndes County. Mary, I see.
I'm with you.
Well, Michael, I'll try to put some of this together. There are a couple of writings. There was a very lengthy article put together by a historian, Paul Murray, that appeared in the Journal of Illinois History in 2017. Young writer from Northwestern University did a neat article of about 20 pages, double spaced, that appeared in the Reader on the 50th anniversary. And a classmate of mine, Jim Washer, did an article in the Chicago Bar magazine and managed to motivate me to get a picture with Jimmy Carter when I went down to Jonathan's school when Carter was receiving an award at the first Jonathan Daniels Award of, well, it was really 25,000 from VMI to give to whatever charity of his choice. And later, Andrew Young received that award. John Lewis received that award. That was the last time I saw him, about 5 years ago. John Lewis was a great man. I had the opportunity in the summer of '84 to spend an afternoon and evening with him, and he just a very down-home person who'd welcome anyone and everyone, and try to encourage them to see the world a little bit through his eyes.
Richard, I have a question. I was wondering how much of a year do you spend talking about this or attending gatherings?
Very little, actually. I've been asked a few times in January to be part of the King commemoration. I was asked by a group of sisters in Iowa, for instance, Clinton, Iowa, to consider coming out there next year if we're past this virtual world. Once in a while, then something else. One student, Hannah Carr, did a beautiful article, really, in the that appeared in the school paper for Calumet College about year and a half ago. She had interviewed me originally for a class that Dan Lowry had wanted people to interview different people, and so I gave her some writings and spent probably an hour interviewing her, and she did a very nice article. So it's not a big burden. It's more people who are friends from that era. The altar boy who I meet at the wheel occasionally now, the one who arranged for the Goldman Sachs stipend, the opportunity to speak really to kind of a group of young people in finance, and they were very, very good group to speak with, good questions. And Anthony had worked his way since he's retired, but he thought it would be an opportunity. They have kind of a minority commemoration around the feast of Dr. King. So anyway, that's kind of how it happens. I want to thank Mike, yourself, and Valerie, and Paul and his wife. I love her artistry. I have a couple of her posters around the house. Yeah. Is there anything else we can do before wrapping up?
Richard, thank you. This was an unforgettable presentation.
Well, it started, really it was kind of within the last couple of days that I chose to take this approach. As I say, I got about halfway through. It didn't exactly explain how I got to Calumet College or to Northwest Indiana, but all that's for some other time.
Richard, this is Amy McCormick, and I would like to hear what advice you would give to students that are moved by their passion right now and their advocacy. What advice would you give them?
I would encourage them. I wouldn't encourage them to loot and burn, but I would very much encourage them to take part, to try to consider. I thought I've been very impressed by the number of whites and Hispanics who have been joining African Americans in the Black Lives Matter movement. As I say, my own becoming part of demonstrations in downtown Chicago where the main issue was education during that summer, spring and summer of '65, came through people who I'd met, through someone like David Lorenz or Father Bill Hogan. Uh, you just go along and it becomes part of you, and you're thought a little bit strange because there are others who want to have no part of it. But I just think there's an opportunity to grow and to see things from a very different perspective. Is that sort of in the direction, Amy, that you were looking at?
Yes, thank you.
I did have a couple of opportunities at the college to speak, including a written address that I have from 2009 when I received the doctorate. I could perhaps send that to you. The remarks that I made at that time. One of the nice things was there were two or three East Chicago police women who were finishing their masters. They were part of the criminal justice program, and they thought it was so nice to have someone from East Chicago be part of the program.
Valerie, you have a question?
Yes, I actually do have another question. Richard, you mentioned that when you were just beginning to, to get more and more deeply involved with the African American community in Chicago, that your parents had their reservations and they were concerned that you might get in trouble, you might get hurt. How did things play out after you were hurt? And I'd just be interested in hearing how your parents reacted. Of course, they must have been horrified and terrified, but anything you could say about how their attitudes developed afterward?
Well, one of the things is Pete McGlennon was a good friend of my brother's, and Pete worked for a long time for Cook County voter registration and elections conduct. And Pete told me only maybe 4 or 5 years ago now that he was with my brother and was in our family home at the time that the news came, and that my father, the first thing he did was stop at Ed Goglin, the local funeral director, to find out how he was going to bring me home. He assumed I would not make it. Mom and Dad came down. My mother had kind of an Irish sense of humor. I remember we received flowers from LBJ, and she gave those flowers to Marie Ryan, Jack Ryan, a classmate, and his mother Marie came down to be with my parents in the hospital, and she thought Marie would love those flowers. And I think during the time, my mother had I remember once I brought Sylvia home. She was an exchange teacher, my wife, and my mother saw. She had a great phrase about marry your own, and she'd used the black B word about Sylvia and about a couple other people who I'd known from that parish. She had kind of an ethnocentric view of the world. On the other hand, the irony is that after marrying, having the 2 kids, my wife was sick and needed surgery around the summer of 84, 85. And Grandma comes back from Denver with my sister. She had moved to Denver around that time, and spends about 3 weeks cooking and feeding and doing everything for the kids and getting along with Sylvia. And the 2 of them spent a lot of time together. This again was 10 years after our marriage. I remember when I graduated from law school in 78, how my mother and wife were both there. She hadn't, it was almost 10 years before since my wife had met with Sylvia before, and the two of them spent that afternoon together. You'd think they'd been having tea together weekly for the previous 10 years rather than living so far apart. It's just, I suppose it's the strength and beauty of women that they were able to do that. So my dad, meanwhile, died in 70, in year 70, and he was in some ways more open about things. My mom had been a housewife, and while she enjoyed Polish and Ukrainian and German and Scandinavian neighbors, she was very Hiberno-centric in her view of the world, and the people she had along best were Mrs. O'Shea, who lived around the corner with her firefighter husband, and they're actually buried together in the adjoining plots out in All Saints Cemetery. It's just, in many ways, she moved beyond her Irish roots. Her younger sister was a nun for 40 years in South Africa, teaching the hearing impaired, and that was one of the areas in which the government allowed East Indians and blacks to be part of the educational process. So it's just a curious thing. She probably would have voted for Donald Trump. On the other hand, she moved considerably beyond him in some of her other ways and actions.
All right. I'd like to just interject a few things. And then I think we only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. And so I want to check if there's additional questions, but I just want to remind everybody that next month we'll be having Walter Skiba and Amy to talk about the history of Calumet College and some of the plans for the future. And so that will be, and I can't even remember the date, but anyway, it's the first Tuesday in October. And now I just want to go back and I want to just, if there's any more questions, I was going to ask the same question that Paul did. And I thought your answer to his question was very good, but are there more questions? Well, Richard, that means that you get off early.
That's right. I can jump out of the basement and go up and eat dinner.
Okay. Well, I thank you for participating. And you can't hear me clap. I don't know. Maybe you
I could hear you.
Oh, okay. And I appreciate you participating in this thing that Valerie and I schemed up 7 years ago when I first moved offices to Calumet College. And so she wanted to do something and I said, well, we would work together on it. And so this is our 7th year and you're starting out you were the first speaker for the 7th year.
Have you recorded any of these?
We are recording today, and we have recorded many things in the past, and they're all on our website, and it goes back to the initial meeting we had in 2014. So yeah, it's on Ollie's website, and it's under media and videos, and then Calumet Revisited. So you can track them down that way.
Thank you for putting up with my let us now praise famous people.
Well, that was neat. I ran into several of those individuals in my when I was out, particularly in California, and so it was interesting. And I'm thinking back, and in 1965, I was just graduating from finishing my undergraduate work, and trying to place myself in that year. So, and I had some actually former editor of the campus newspaper spent a summer. I think it was in '64 though.
That was the Freedom Summer, and great many young people went to Mississippi that year.
Right, and he ended up being. He wrote for the Baltimore Sun. I think his career was spent as an editor with the Baltimore Sun. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking of as you were talking about your experiences, trying to place myself somewhere.
Well, thank you. I spent a lot of time today doing an outline for this, and I'd like to maybe get some friend help me put a transcript together and see if I can carry it on. And
someone else asked me if we're planning on having it recorded, and so we'll probably have several requests for that. So, any other questions? No, we got maybe another minute or so. I don't know how long these go. I think we signed up for an hour and 15 minutes,
but at first we were going to be 40 minutes, and
I know
we were both content with that.
I know, but then I thought, no, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I extended it to an hour and 15 minutes because I was cheap. I didn't want to spend more money. I didn't want to pay Zoom money for doing this, and then I thought, well, that's stupid. But that's so anyway.
Post 40 minutes was an additional fee?
Yes, Zoom 30 minutes is free, but or 40 minutes is free, but if you go beyond 40, then they want to charge you. And so I just signed a year's contract with them, and then as soon as I did, they said, well, you should go through Google. They don't charge for that. Anyway, but anyway, so, and this is the first time I've hosted a Zoom meeting. We had our Calumet Revisited speaker from last May, I think, from the Film Museum, and the Film Museum did all the work hosting. So this is my first opportunity to do this. So I hope I didn't goof up too much.
This has been a great way to start.
No, it's good. Did a great job.
Yeah. Oh, yes, and I loved it. Richard.
Well, you're the producer.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And but I learned some things that I didn't know before, and I was just curious if, as long as we have some more time, how long were you hospitalized there?
6 months. A month in Alabama and 5 months in Oak Park Hospital.
Okay. And what did your parishioners? What kind of response did?
Very positive. I mean, it was almost all African American parish. I was able to go there for a dinner, I believe, the January after I was still in the hospital, and tremendous response. A number of the people from that era are still friends. I went back to Edna Lehner's funeral a year ago, and her daughter remains a close friend. And the Rudolph Harper was another altar boy who went to the seminary for many years and went to Loyola University, and had a brother who played basketball for Portland of all places, and has settled down there to sell insurance for Allstate for the last 30 years or so, and is an influential person in the community. These are genuine people. I felt very badly. I was not allowed to return to the African American community. Cardinal Cody decided I had become overly politically involved, and my way of staying sane, at least for the next 3 years, was to have learned Spanish and to spend those 3 years in a largely Hispanic church in Humboldt Park. St. Sylvester's is on Palmer Square, just north of Humboldt Park, on Humboldt Boulevard. So to move then to the world of East Chicago, which is now about 90% Black and Hispanic, has been, I probably came better prepared than most non-Hispanics or African Americans for working here.
Yes, okay. I'm just going to say that's a hell of a way to prepare for that, but anyway.
Well, but it's taken. It's been good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Paul, we have to, Barb, if you'll release him some afternoon to, Burger King is the one place that's open on Chicago Avenue these days. McDonald's has refused to reopen for people stopping by.
Okay, I'll shoot you an email and we'll get together soon.
Thank you.
Okay, and I want to thank everybody and for participating in our very first Zoom meeting. So, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Nice, thank you.
Okay. Bye, Richard. Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Bye, Paul. Bye, Barb. Bye, Valerie.
Take care.
Bye, Cynthia.
Bye.
Thank you. And bye, Anne, as well.